Take a look at this and listen. Hard to pick up there, but the cops were, according to protesters, firing rubber bullets into the crowd. The cops themselves call them non-lethal rounds, won't describe specifically what they were. 8 people in all arrested during those demonstrations in LA, one of which shut down a major freeway. Meantime, here in New York, in Times Square, thousands converged there last night, having walked from Union Square about a mile south to make their feelings known under the banner of Justice for Trayvon. They also chanted, "No justice, no peace." But in contradiction of that chant, it does seem, Shep, that for the most part, while there have been a lot of demonstrations, the demonstrators themselves have acted peacefully. Shep?
All right, Jonathan Hunt, thank you. Let's bring in senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's also live in our studio. So some civil rights charges possible. Well, what do you make of it, Judge?
Well, they're very difficult charges for the government to prove. You know, Shep, murder is not a federal crime. Murder committed by a private person against another private person, a government official not involved. But the Congress can make murder unlawful if it's animated by racial hatred. So the federal prosecutors would basically have to prove, satisfy themselves, satisfy a grand jury, and then prove to a trial jury what the Florida state prosecutors were unable to prove, which is that George Zimmerman was animated by racial hatred when he pulled that trigger. Now, that not only defies the jury verdict in Florida, which was revealed on Saturday night, it also defies the federal government's own investigation in which FBI agents interviewed over 30 witnesses, not only people who had knowledge of the case, but people who had knowledge of the background, the thinking, the value judgment, and the personality of George Zimmerman. And the FBI concluded that this was not animated by race. So the federal government would have a very high bar here over which to jump if they want to indict and prosecute him.
And we won't know for a while, right?
No. And in fairness to Attorney General Holder, this is not something he can make a judgment call on today. He probably has to have all these FBI reports reviewed. He probably has to review the questions the jury asked, the information that was presented to the jury. I don't think you're going to see an answer from the federal government on this one for a couple of months. I hope that the answer is a legal judgment, Shep, and not a political one. But the federal government is under a lot of pressure to respond to the demonstrations that Jonathan just summarized.
You know, after the O.J. trial, the family of Nicole Brown Simpson filed a civil suit and won a $31 million judgment in civil court. Right. Is that sort of thing being talked about or a possibility here?
Yes, it's being talked about, and yes, it's a probability for the parents of Trayvon Martin to sue George Zimmerman in state court in Florida, at which he would be compelled to testify. The amount of money they could earn would be a jury's judgment of what Trayvon Martin would have earned if he were permitted to stay alive. Very difficult for the jury to figure that out for a 17-year-old boy, but that's what the case would be. They wouldn't be compensated for their natural grief at the loss of their child. They would only be compensated for the money he would have earned and probably left to them.
All right, Judge Napolitano live in our studios. Judge, thank you.
You're welcome, Shep.
Since the Obama administration took office, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department has successfully prosecuted these 3 cases you see on your screen there, all of which involve racially motivated hate crimes where the victim was a minority. Yet at the same time, the DOJ dismissed the Black Panther case. Remember that one from the 2008 election, where these individuals were seen intimidating white voters at a Philadelphia polling location. So, as the DOJ considers hate crime charges against George Zimmerman now, many people are asking, are they playing politics when it comes to racism? Let's ask Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano.
You could argue that politics and racism motivated the entire George Zimmerman prosecution. Because remember, the police and the prosecutors, local and state, decided that no crime was committed or that they would be unable to prove that a crime was committed. It wasn't until politics entered the Zimmerman-Trayvon Martin fray that it was determined that he should be charged with a crime that the government knew it couldn't prove, which was second-degree murder. So having been acquitted of second-degree murder by a jury in a fair trial in a state court, and manslaughter, an added charge in the 11th hour. The pressure now is on the federal government to charge him with murder. Is murder a federal crime? No. but Congress has made murder animated by racial hatred a federal crime. So in order to prosecute him for murder in federal court, the federal government would have to show that his behavior was animated by hatred of Trayvon Martin because he was black.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You have an FBI report, 30 witnesses. They found no evidence of racial hatred. You have the juror 37, B37, now granting an interview saying that race was not a part of the deliberations.
Right.
And you have the Department of Justice yesterday, and something I've never heard about, correct me if I'm wrong, asking people to come forward if they have evidence of any racial hatred in this case. If the Department of Justice actually had a case, why would they need to reach out to the public for help?
Because the Department of Justice doesn't have a case. The Department of Justice might as well, in this instance, be called the Department of Political Justice. I mean, they're interested in addressing the political needs of the president's constituency rather than doing the right thing under the law. Look, as you said, the FBI investigated George Zimmerman. They interrogated not only the people who had knowledge of the facts in this case, but people who've known him for the past 20 years. And they reported, the FBI reported, the Justice Department's own FBI reported that they couldn't find any evidence of racial animus in his persona as a youth, as a teenager, as a young man, or in this case. How could the Justice Department just throw out all that research and start all over because they didn't like the end result of what the FBI found?
Let me ask you this. As a former judge yourself, could it be that the Department of Justice is just trying to assuage the public sentiment because it was split in this nation?
Yes.
And that they're just looking at this case and that ultimately they'll say, you know what, we couldn't come up with that.
I'll say this for Attorney General Holder, and I have not hesitated to criticize him extensively. The fact that he is willing to discuss this is a good thing. Look what happened in Los Angeles last night. I mean, conversation is needed. I'm glad the case was on television because the public can see that the government couldn't prove its case. But to the extent that General Holder wants to discuss this and talk about it, that's a good thing. But he's got to come down on the right side, which is this thing has to end.
All right. Judge Andrew Napolitano, as always, thanks for your expertise.
Pleasure, Gretchen.
She submitted an affidavit that was, if not perjurious, completely misleading. She violated all kinds of rules of the profession, and her conduct bordered on criminal conduct.
Yeah. For more on this, let's bring in Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, great to see you. You know, you read through this charging affidavit as we did many, many months ago, and it seems to many that it was very one-sided. And moreover, it left out a lot of key facts, as we just mentioned, that really could have benefited George Zimmerman in this case.
And the government has an obligation, Trace, and thank you for having me. It's always nice to be with you. The government has an obligation to reveal all of this. Here's how the law works in Florida. In Florida, when the government wants to charge someone with a felony, it can bring evidence before a grand jury, present the evidence, notify the target, and let the target, the person they're attempting to indict, present evidence before the grand jury, and the grand jury weighs and sifts and decides whether or not to indict. They almost always do what the prosecutors want them to do, but there's a weighing and sifting of the evidence. The other way, which is the way they did it here, is for that lady, the prosecutor in charge, Angela Corey, simply to file the complaint, supported by an affidavit that she signed. Now, when she signs that affidavit, she is required to inform the court not only of the strengths in her case, but of the weaknesses as well. So when Professor Dershowitz says she lied, it appears she did lie. When he said she didn't comply with the rules of ethics, it appears she did not comply with the rules of ethics. When he said she may have committed a crime, well, lying under oath is a crime. It's the type of crime she prosecutes people for. She materially misled the court into thinking she had a far stronger case than she did. And I dare say, Trace, if I had been the judge, or if any judge, let's take Judge Nelson, who tried the case, and the judge knew what we now know about the case, what Ms. Corey was obliged to tell the judge from the outset, the judge probably would have rejected the charge of second-degree murder and said, you need to charge him with something less.
Yeah, and I'm running out of time here, Judge, but I want to go you one further and just talk about how Mark O'Mara says that he believes that Angela Corey and her office actually withheld evidence. And I want to know what exactly George Zimmerman and his attorneys, what right do they have to actually go back after the government in this case?
Well, if she sues for malicious prosecution, she will have to, if Zimmerman sues for malicious prosecution, he will have to demonstrate that Ms. Corey's behavior was motivated not by the facts in the case, but by an overriding desire to win. And that overriding desire to win caused her to break the rules and break the law and expose him to 30 years in jail when he shouldn't have been exposed to it at all. A lot of us who have looked at this are beginning to think he probably should file such a case. That's how unjustified and unjustifiable this prosecution turned out to be.
Yeah, Judge, I want you to stay with us if you can. Up next, I want to ask you about the possibility that the feds may bring some new charges. This is a very big case, and we want one more input from the judge before we let him go. That's coming up next on America Live. Still, of course, waiting for Attorney General Eric Holder to address the NAACP in Orlando. I want to bring back in the senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, to talk about this. Judge, it seems to me, and we've mentioned this before, but the FBI kind of did their investigation, 35 witnesses. They issued this document that was dozens of pages long saying that there was no racial prejudice. They're an arm of the DOJ. Why is the DOJ not satisfied with that, Judge?
Well, because the DOJ could arguably be called the Department of Political Justice, and sometimes is trying to satisfy the demands of political constituencies more than it is following the law. This is a very dangerous intersection, Trace, of politics and prosecution. Prosecutions should be based upon the law and the government's ability to prove its case. It should not be based upon which crowd is screaming the loudest for the hide of whom. This guy was validly and legitimately acquitted in a state court, and now the feds want to prosecute him. Look, murder is not a federal crime unless it is animated by hatred for the race of the person who was killed. There was no evidence presented in the Florida case to demonstrate that George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin because he hated the color of his skin or hated the race of which he was a member. Nevertheless, in the charging document, the one we talked about in the last section, the affidavit that Angela Corey submitted to the court, she said this was all based on race. So for the federal government now to enter into this picture and prosecute him on a new count, it would have to reject everything that the jury found in Florida. It would have to reject what its own FBI found.
And we don't even want to go back, Judge, to the selective prosecution the DOJ has kind of implemented over the past 4 or 5 years. But you talk about these cases as a rule. Even go back to Rodney King, Judge, back in the 90s.
Right.
And they went after those police officers, and only 2 of the 4, even with the videotaped evidence, only 2 of the 4 were prosecuted in that. These are very difficult cases to undertake.
Look, the Constitution prohibits double jeopardy, but the Supreme, meaning trying a person more than once for the same crime. But the Supreme Court has interpreted that to mean each jurisdiction gets one shot. So if you do one thing, pull a trigger once and kill a person, the state can prosecute you and the feds can prosecute you. That doesn't make sense, and I reject it, but that's the law of the land. But the second prosecution has to be just and fair and based on a different theory from the first prosecution. And where the federal government's crack investigative team, there's nobody in the world better than the FBI, has concluded, going all the way back to Zimmerman's childhood, that there's no evidence of him hating black people. This is a case they can't make, this is a case they can't win, and so this is a case they should not bring.
And one more, the lead investigator from the Sanford Police Department, a black police officer, a sergeant within the Sanford Police Department, looking at all the evidence, Judge, and saying, look, there's nothing here that says this was racially motivated. It's got to give the DOJ some reason for pause.
One would hope so, but we'll see.
Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, great to see you as always.
Good to see you, as always, Trace. Thanks.
Thank you.
A panel, the court-martial equivalent of a jury, now selected in the deadly Fort Hood shooting case. 13 people were killed, as you know, back in 2009. That's when authorities say Major Nidal Hassan opened fire at the Texas Army base. The former Army psychiatrist said earlier he did it in defense of Taliban leaders. Hassan is defending himself in the court-martial set to begin August 6th. Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, joins us now with more on that. You've supervised trials in which a defendant was defending himself. That's not easy.
In plain English, it's a nightmare. It really is the judge's nightmare, and I'll tell you why. Because you cannot, in the presence of the jury, be perceived as helping the defendant On the other hand, you have to make sure that the trial is basically fair. And if the defendant is missing an opportunity to do something, the failure to do which might invalidate a conviction and you end up trying it all over again, you have to nudge the defendant. So you got to be very, very gentle. You're basically going to put the jury out of the courtroom a lot and say, now, Major Nadal, you got to ask the question this way. Are you forgetting this document? Or I want you to talk to shadow counsel, a fancy phrase for the lawyer I'm going to make sit next to you who you just fired.
So this could take a long time. I mean, there could be a lot of panel in, panel out.
Yes, a trial like this will take 3 to 4 times as long as a trial with lawyers defending the defendant.
It's a death penalty case, and one of the officers who has been empaneled has expressed reservations with the death penalty. Apparently, this is an officer who is a devout Southern Baptist and said it's a high mark for me in terms of saying to put someone to death.
That is not uncommon to hear from jurors. I have heard that. The next question is it impossible for you to put someone to death? And if the person says yes, well, then they're not qualified to be on the jury. If the person says no, it's just a high mark, I would demand the most stringent of evidence. Guess what? That's what the court is going to tell them to demand. So this particular person, and again, Major Nadal defending himself allowed him on the jury. This particular person with the qualms about the death penalty is an appropriate juror on a death penalty case, in my view.
It has taken 4 years to bring this case to trial, and the federal government is still calling it a case of workplace violence. It's not terrorism. What about his antics in the courtroom? If he gets up and talks about, defending Islam and that kind of thing?
Well, there are no cameras in a military proceeding. There are no cameras in any federal proceeding. And the jurors, though the jurors are professional military people, I don't think this will resonate with them. I think it'll be counterproductive, and I think they'll be able to overlook it, and I think the judge will be able to restrain him when he does it. It would be unsightly if it were televised and we were to see that and have to listen to it. But I don't think it will affect the ultimate outcome of the case. The evidence of his guilt is overwhelming. The elements of first-degree murder, of murder with a capital murder with a death penalty, are clearly met. It's just a question of presenting it in a fair environment for the jury.
Well, let's turn our eyes to another legal topic in the news these days. The Attorney General Eric Holder says his department is going to take a look at the George Zimmerman case and see whether there might be federal charges that could be filed against that guy who has been acquitted on the second-degree murder charges in that Florida courtroom. Now, just first of all, your thoughts on that, the Attorney General expressing that?
Well, I think the whole reason that George Zimmerman was prosecuted in the first place is because the crowds, the mobs, demanded it. So now the government, the federal government, after the state government tried him, did a lousy job, shouldn't have tried him for a charge that they ought to have known they couldn't convict him of. Now the federal government is going to review this case just because the mobs are demanding it. The federal government has already reviewed this case. The FBI has interviewed between 30 and 35 people. They went back to Zimmerman's youth as a child. Their conclusion: he did not do this for racial hatred reasons, and there's no evidence that he's a racist. End of the story. I don't know where the Attorney General is going to go from here.
General Holder was talking about the stand your ground laws and from the NAACP and urging Florida to get rid of it. Stand your ground didn't even enter into Zimmerman's defense.
Correct. It's also a state law. It's not something that his opinions are relevant on, other than as a private citizen he can have his opinion on anything.
The state law was left. The framers of the Constitution left state law or criminal law up to the states.
Yes. In fact, murder is not a federal crime. But the feds can charge you with murder if they believe they can prove to a jury that you did so because you hated the race of the victim. There was no evidence of that in the trial in Florida, and the FBI has ruled it out. So the feds are probably just responding to pressure from political groups, and that's not a basis for deciding whom to prosecute.
We'll see what Eric Holder and the Justice Department decide to do in this case. Judge Andrew Napolitano, always good to have your expertise.
Pleasure,
Thanks.
John.
Well, just when you thought government snooping stopped at emails and phone records, enter the license plate reader. The American Civil Liberties Union is out with a new report today showing how law enforcement agencies across the country are amassing millions of digital records on the location and movement of every vehicle with a license plate. Is this legal? Let's ask the judge, Andrew Napolitano. Thank you, Judge.
Eric, pleasure.
Boy, oh boy, what now?
You know, if you look at the big picture, it seems like a shoe is dropping every day, and it's always dropping in favor of the government doing things to us that we didn't know about, because it's easier for the government to keep control on things when it monitors us. It seems as if the government will cut any corner and any hole in the Constitution in order to make its job easier. I'm not surprised by this.
Tell us what it is.
I'm saddened
what are they doing with
All right,
this?
here's the law.
They're tracking our cars.
If the government wants to track where your car goes by accessing your GPS or following your cell phone that's in your pocket or on the front seat with you, it needs a warrant to do it. But under the present state of the law, if the government wants to take a picture of your car every place it goes, which has the same function, serves the same function as following your GPS device, it doesn't need a warrant to do so. The reason it doesn't need a warrant to do so is twofold. The license plate is in public, so the government takes the position you have no right to privacy and you don't expect privacy on your license plate. The other reason is the government has not yet introduced into evidence in court in prosecuting someone the photographs of these cars, so no one has challenged it. In my opinion, once they challenge it, the court will say, wait a minute, the linchpin of the Fourth Amendment is what's called articulable suspicion. Something the police can articulate about why they need to follow that car. If we let the police willy-nilly follow us wherever we want to go, we'll be like East Germany. If we require articulable suspicion, we'll have personal liberty in a free society.
Judge, bring that to the bigger picture, the recent news. The NSA had been data mining us. They were taking data. They can look back. They can find out what we were saying. They weren't just looking at telephone numbers and times. But isn't this the same thing?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is local police picking up on what the feds could get away with. And this is why it was profoundly wrong for federal judges on the FISA court to sign those orders saying to Verizon, give us all phone records and data of 113 million people. If they're looking for a phone call that Eric Bolling had with somebody in the Middle East or that Andrew Napolitano had with somebody in the Middle East, fine. They can go to the FISA court and say, we need Bolling's records and Napolitano's records. But why do you need records of 113 million people? The Constitution specifically says they have to particularize what they want. They can't run a dragnet.
We have just about a minute. Judge, there are drones now, and I understand they're in use, where they can videotape a section of a city. They can take it, they can put the videotape away. If something happens in that city, they can go back and take a look at that. And down to, they can read the time on my watch. Is that legal?
No. Senator Rand Paul is holding up the nomination of James Comey to run the FBI. No, none of this is his fault. Until his predecessor, Bob Mueller, reveals what the FBI is doing with drones. Because the courts haven't ruled on it, the legislature hasn't written laws about it, and we need to know what the people we hire to keep us safe are doing to keep our freedom safe.
What are they doing with the information? That's what we really need to know. Judge, we got to go. I'd like to do this again. I love this topic. And we're on this, we see eye to eye on this
Yes,
one.
we are, my friend.
Very good to see you, Judge Napolitano.
There were no other viable options, and I view this as an opportunity to say, let's stop the decline. This is a situation that's been a period of decline of 60 years in Detroit, and it's resulted in $18 billion of debt that the city can't afford to pay, and more importantly, it's resulted in services that are not good nor appropriate for the wonderful people of Detroit. To give you one illustration, response times for police in the city of Detroit are 58 minutes. The national average is 11 minutes. I respect the citizens of Detroit, and they deserve a better answer.
Well, there's the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, today on our show. The city of Detroit filing for federal bankruptcy protection late this afternoon. Just some stats of what the Wall Street Journal calls a long, sad decline. Detroit's population fell by more than 26% from 2000 to 2012. Totals about 700,000 now, down from almost 2 million in 1950. An estimated 40,000 structures or land parcels sit vacant or empty in Detroit. The city spent $100 million more than it took in every year since 2008 on average, borrowing the rest. Some 36% of Detroiters live below the poverty level between 2007 and 2011, according to the census. In 2012, and this is why the 58 minutes means a lot, Detroit had the highest violent crime rate for a city with more than 200,000 residents, according to the FBI. And a bankruptcy filing by the long-struggling city is essentially the largest ever by a U.S. municipality. So let's bring in our panel. Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Kirsten Powers, columnist for the Daily Beast, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Judge, for a lot of people, this is not a surprise, but it does raise some interesting questions about what happens in Detroit and what happens to a lot of cities on the brink.
It also raises interesting questions about the status of the economy today, which the president and his folks have, of course, been boasting is on its way back. This is a catastrophic failure for them in a state that politically typically goes to the president, and a city that has almost always gone for the president. These numbers, 18 billion in debt, 2.5 billion unsecured, this is going to be nearly impossible for Detroit to pay back without the most severe haircut, so to speak, to the people who loaned money. So if you loaned Detroit $1,000, don't expect more than $4 or $5 back on the 1,000. I mean, those are ratios that we don't typically see in bankruptcy today. It's very bad, it's catastrophic, it's bad politically, it's almost impossible financially to resolve with any semblance of fairness.
Just a few minutes ago, the mayor of Detroit, Democrat Dave Bing, came to the microphones to talk to reporters.
One of the things that I want to say to our citizens is that as tough as this is, I really didn't want to go in this direction, but now that we are here, we have to make the best of it. I think Kevin and the team that he's brought together has a lot of history of succeeding. This is very difficult for all of us, but if it's going to make the citizens better off, then this is a new start for us.
The White House releasing a statement late this afternoon saying this: the president and members of the president's senior team continue to closely monitor the situation in Detroit, while leaders on the ground in Michigan and the city's creditors understand that they must find a solution to Detroit's serious financial challenge. We remain committed to continuing our strong partnership with Detroit as it works to recover and revitalize and maintain its status as one of America's great cities. Judge, I guess there are a number of cities in this position, and when any city is spending $100 million more than it takes in every year for year upon year,
right,
eventually you're going to run into a buzzsaw.
Well, absolutely, and I guess they either thought the good times would come back, or each governmental administration thought that the hour of reckoning would come on somebody else's watch. I don't imagine Dave Bing ever dreamed that this would happen on his watch. But now it's in the hands of a federal bankruptcy judge who'll basically decide who's going to get paid what.
And how much authority for that judge?
Great question. Almost absolute authority, and rarely interfered with by an appellate court, as long as it's as long as it makes economic sense. So he will take all of the debts and obligations and all of the assets and just slice and dice and divide. He may give more to the police because police protection and fire protection are absolutely vital to stay there. He may give less to the pensioners because they are essentially gone and no longer living there. But his or her word will ultimately be final and rarely interfered with. We know a couple things for sure. We know that the IRS treated people differently based upon their political views, and that they suffered egregiously for it, and they managed to get past the goal line of the 2 elections that Charles talked about before any of this was exposed. We also know it is more likely than not that Lois Lerner is at the center of this, and that she attempted to take the Fifth Amendment. The committee can do it alone, doesn't have to go to the full House, can involuntarily immunize her, give her immunity whether she accepts it or not, and then she loses her Fifth Amendment protection, and she'll be compelled to testify. If she doesn't, she'll go to jail until she testifies. And they can do that to the political appointees as well. Only that will get to the bottom of this.
You say you knocked Jesse Ventura to the floor with a punch. Now, you don't mention his name, but everybody knows who that is. Number one, that happened? You knocked him out?
Yeah, well, I knocked him down. It was the year that we lost our first 2 SEALs in Iraq. We came home. We lost our last guy just before coming home. We had the wake in a SEAL bar there in Coronado, and he was there.
He was bad-mouthing the war, right?
Bad-mouthing the war, bad-mouthing Bush, bad-mouthing America. I asked him to please tone it down, that we did not want to upset the family members of Mikey Monsoor.
Who was killed?
Yes, sir. Y'all deserve to lose a few guys.
Navy SEALs.
I'm assuming he was saying that to me.
So once he said you deserve to lose a few guys, you popped him?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's the story. That story led former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura to file a defamation lawsuit against Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, America's deadliest sniper. Even though Kyle was murdered earlier this year, a judge says the lawsuit can continue against his estate. Joining us right now is Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, I talked to Chris's wife, his widow.
Right.
She knows no details about the case, so it's going to be the governor's word against Chris Kyle, who's not here.
Right. She was not there in the bar scene that Chris Kyle was
but now
describing
responsible?
to O'Reilly. Well, as the administrator of his estate, she could lose assets. The estate could lose value. This book is a runaway bestseller.
Still.
She's experiencing and enjoying that wealth because her husband, regrettably, is dead, the author of the book and the person that was being interviewed by Bill. But what he said to Bill and what he recounted in the book forms the basis for Governor Ventura's lawsuit. Now, until about 30 years ago, you couldn't sue a dead person for libel. The theory was the person who you say harmed your reputation is dead. You're now free to say whatever you want and rehabilitate that reputation. But the law changed. And just like if somebody breaks your bone, punches you in the nose and then dies, you can sue their estate. The same is the case now for libel.
So if you are Mrs. Kyle, you have to go and assemble those witnesses that were there with Chris and start building a case
Yes.
in which you were not a witness?
Yes, and the reason you have to do that is for Governor Ventura to win, he has to prove the statement was false.
Right.
That, in fact, Chris never cold-cocked him and knocked him down. And after he proves that it was false, he has to prove that Chris knew it was false when he published it, either by saying it to Bill O'Reilly or by putting it in the book, or was reckless in his attitude as to whether it was true or false. This is the law of the land when you're a public official as governor, or a public figure as Governor Ventura is.
What about the character of this clown, governor, who wants to move forward with this lawsuit against an American hero?
You know, the court does not concern itself with character. And the fact that Chris Kyle was a hero and Governor Ventura is a character is not something that would come
the
into
fact
play.
that Ventura wants to do it, what does it say about him?
Well, anybody can form their judgment about Governor Ventura. This is a relatively minor blip in his life and his career, but he's making a lawsuit out of it.
Yep. Good luck.
These are very rare, these lawsuits against people that are dead, for the reasons you articulated. Who's there to defend it?
I hope Ms. Kyle goes in and assembles some witnesses and fights back. Judge Napolitano, thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.